Hello and welcome to Meetings Africa 2015, brought to you, of course, by South African Tourism and CNBC Africa. My name is Nozipho Mbanjwa, and I'm delighted to be your host this evening. What we're going to be doing is interrogating the Africa Rising narrative, and in particular, we're going to be asking some very difficult questions around the contribution of business tourism to this gearing up of the African continent, not only for growth, but we're talking sustained growth, taking on these difficult questions and pushing back against some of the particular narrative that's come out are my four panelists that have joined me on the stage. Closest to me, of course, is the CEO of South African Tourism, Mr. Thulani Nzima. Thank you so much for being here, sir. Next to Thulani is Nina Freyson-Pretorius. She is the chairperson for the Southern African Association for the Conference Industry and the president of the International Congress and Convention Association. Long name and big titles as well, ladies and gentlemen. Moving on, next to Nina is Jeffers Murika. Jeffers is a professional conference organizer and a member of the African Association of Agricultural Economists. And last but certainly not least is Victor Khumeswane. He is a freelance conference speaker, workshop facilitator, a consultant on African business development, program director, radio and television host, and of course my very colleague at CNBC Africa. Thank you so much for making the time to join us today. Perhaps let's start off with connecting the dots for the bigger picture. And I want to start with you, Thulani. Connect the dots for us. The importance of tourism broadly for economic growth and for the investment case of the continent.
I think every government is worried about two main things. The first one is the creation of job opportunities for its citizens. The second one is economic contribution to the economy. So if that is the case, it means all of us are preoccupied with these common issues. For the continent of Africa in general, it is also worried about bringing investment into this country. There's always a huge competition for direct foreign investment in any country. So it takes infrastructure, it takes a whole lot of legislative and regulatory environments to create a space like that. And there is no better way of doing this than to use tourism, because tourism is the softest way in which people can create opportunities for themselves, whilst at the same time making a significant contribution in the economies of those countries. There are many countries, maybe some of them here today, who do not have mineral resources that some countries are blessed with, and they rely a lot more on tourism for job creation and the contribution to tourism. So when we come together here and advancing Africa together, what we are saying is we have a common destiny, and that is the creation of jobs and the contribution to economy.
A lot of issues that you raised, and I'll come back to the question of balancing tourism and the protection of our mineral resources, amongst other issues. But Nina, let's bring it down a little bit. Let's look at business tourism in particular. Thulani speaks about foreign direct investment, but surely there's also another element to this. We're also looking at growing our very own knowledge economy. Connect the dots for us in that regard.
So ICA is, you've just mentioned, Nozipho, the International Conferences and Conventions Association, and we're a global association representing 90 countries around the world with 1,000 organizational members, all working in tourism, convention centers, convention bureaus, conference organizers, service providers. And our key focus is looking at associations. And when I say associations for the viewers, it's really people that are working in academics, scientists, educationalists, people in specialized fields. And our key focus as an association is to look at those association conferences, share that knowledge, and make sure that that rotates. And in particular, the focus advancing Africa is to bring that business to the African continent and South Africa, obviously here at Meetings Africa. So Meetings Africa really talks to creating the platform where we can actually discuss how we get hold of that business. We don't want it only to stay in Europe. We don't only want it to stay in the Americas. We want it on our continent. And one of the key drivers there is the academic component. So we've got the infrastructure, we've got the airlift, but it's how do we engage with our academics, with associations to participate and understand the value of that, and then talking to Tulani's point about the skills development.
And of course, you raised the issue of associations, which will go in a little bit more deeper, especially as you sit with the global cap on. How does this have regional and national significance? But Jeffers, before we get there, you are coming in from Kenya, from Nairobi in particular, and perhaps you can give some regional insight into a country that has also battled with keeping its tourism sector on its feet, working hard to get that tourism sector back on its feet. Let's talk about whether you get a sense continentally that the case for tourism as an investment destination for the continent and for the region is well articulated by Africans.
Thanks for the opportunity to address the gathering. When I sit here, I sit as a representative of associations in Africa. And as a Kenyan, I'm always very passionate about my country. Definitely we've had challenges, especially in terms of security. As we sit here, I do know that quite a number of hotels, especially in the coastal region of Kenya, some of them have actually shut. Quite a number of people have lost their jobs just because of insecurity. But our government is not asleep. It's really doing a lot to ensure that we still get back to our feet. And when I say get back to our feet, I mean that we want to do better than we've been doing. We cannot say we've been so perfect, but we will get back to our feet and we are doing better. When you compare South Africa with Kenya, of course, we cannot say that South Africa is much better than Kenya. The only attractive part of it is that when people come to South Africa, they talk about probably good infrastructure. When they come to Kenya, they say, oh, Kenya, you have traffic jams. It's a global problem, I'm sure, but definitely I believe that...
Jesus, I think you're going to get yourself into trouble. I can see Tulani is already angling his body at you, but we'll come to that. And maybe the question is not a competitive comparison, but maybe how do we get tourists to do multi-country visits and be able to move from Kenya to South Africa and maybe even touch Cote d'Ivoire in that one particular trip. But we'll get to that. Victor, you come with a vast and in-depth African perspective. Give us a sense of whether what you're hearing from the panelists thus far and your experience on the ground tallies. And in essence, then, my question becomes, do you get a sense that Africa is improving in terms of its competitiveness as a business tourism destination, comparing it, of course, with your European markets and your North American markets?
Without a doubt, I cannot compare it with European markets. Just think about it this way. If Africa is at the heart of improving global economic appeal of emerging markets, by that I mean whether you compare it to Brazil or Russia or China, Africa offers the longest upside. I can say for the next 50 years, Africa will remain attractive to investment. And the reason business tourism is so important is because, before I say anything, after traveling to Kenya on business, you are likely to bring your family for holiday. Often you are forced to go into a country on business, and then you discover what a beautiful country it is. And you realize, well, why don't I come back? So the spin-offs of business tourism should be seen in that perspective, that it's not only about people like here coming, who are high spenders, of course, not looking at what the spin-offs are. But Africa as a whole, definitely, I would say yes. Think about the past 4 weeks, if we can just give an illustration. There was a meeting in Ethiopia of the heads of states with the AU summit. That AU summit is coming to South Africa in June, so already the benefits of having been in Ethiopia come into Africa. In West Africa, even with the problem of Boko Haram, there was the ECOWAS initiative that is trying to deal with the Niger, Cameroon, Nigeria, and that calls for a lot of meetings. So before we even get to business, just the government business, the bilaterals or the multilaterals are such that you get to see a lot of conferencing, a lot of meetings happening. And then, of course, the fact that many African countries, the top 10 fastest growing economies in the world, includes at least at every given point minimum of 5 African countries. What does that say? It means lots of people who are going to those countries on missions, trade missions, trying to do deals are all going to drive business tourism. And there's the reason I'm saying there's no doubt about Africa's rise.
I want to latch on to that last point, and perhaps, Tulani, you can pick up on that. And in particular, you are reinforcing what we've heard quite often, that, you know, if you look at the fastest growing countries in the world, at least 6 or 7 of them are in Africa. From where you stand, do you think there has been a real understanding of the needs in terms of the investment that's needed for tourism in the country? And what are you expecting in terms of the slice of the pie into your particular sector?
It's not enough. I think if you look at the countries that we are talking about in the African region, most of them are still battling with the contribution of tourism. The return on investment in terms of the tourism is always underestimated for some strange reason. And you also see it within the South African environment that the allocation of budgets to promote tourism is not a priority as such. But I think our government in South Africa has done very well in the sense that we have a dedicated Department of Tourism with a ministry, and the budget allocated to us is much better. We would love to see a situation where there is a much broader understanding within the rest of the African continent. In terms of my expectation on the budget speech of the finance minister, of course I would like to see more money coming into tourism because tourism has proven itself to deliver on its mandate. And the numbers that we are talking about coming into South Africa have a real impact on the tourism industry, the hotel infrastructure that has grown up in the past few years bears testimony to the fact that tourism is contributing significantly, including infrastructures such as where we are now.
I see Nina nodding. I'm not sure if she's agreeing with you or if she's totally in disagreement, but let's get you coming in with your say.
I wanted to just add to what Thulani is saying. I think one of the challenges that we face, and it's not necessarily only on the African continent, but I think it's a global problem, is to differentiate very clearly between leisure tourism and business tourism. You know, our arrival statistics as to differentiate who's coming on business, just to your point, Victor, who's coming on business and then who is coming on to leisure. So, and I think if we are able in a better way, and I think it's something that we grapple with internationally, to prove the value of business tourism to the sector, the skills, the GDP, all of that, that's one of the sort of blockages that we have all faced on an international level.
But my question is whether we as average Africans understand it. I don't think it's ever going to be the preserve of tourism. Yes, maybe tourism authorities and agencies might play a role in promoting the awareness. But just can we say an average waiter in South Africa understands the importance, their role in driving tourism? Do the people at the airport understand that? So when you look at it much more broadly, then you will understand. Because I'll tell you, especially with Africa, although we are focusing, yes, on people flying from Europe because we know they are big spenders per capita from US and from elsewhere, we are overlooking a myriad of travelers who are traveling not by air, but driving through the border gates. The question is our governments, African governments, appreciative of the importance of making the ease of driving through border posts on legitimate business?
We've got an East African sitting right next to you. These are the poster children for regional integration, if I'm not mistaken. Now, if we look at the East African community, has it lived up to this particular promise? Is it easy for tourists to move in and around East Africa? And of course, bear in mind that we are acutely aware of the challenges that Tanzania poses to this particular utopia that I'm painting.
I think in East Africa, if I allow me to speak about East Africa, there is a form of cohesiveness which is starting to take shape. And the East African community, which is now being fronted by our heads of state, we are trying to see if we can move to a federation. But before we get there, you know, we need to make our people move easily across the border. Just like you have said, there is a challenge, especially between Kenya and Tanzania, in terms of moving tourists from Tanzania to the Kenyan airports. This has been happening for the last almost 30 years.
What are the key issues? Because I think we need to get to the bottom of what the key issues are if we are going to be able to extrapolate that particular lesson into other regions. Why is there a standoff between Tanzania and the other members of the East African community when it comes to tourism?
I think the standoff could be summarized as some form of teething disagreements between our governments, which I'm sure I'm not in a position to speak about, but I'm sure it's going to be addressed in that particular level.
Victor, I'll come to you. Are you going to give us an explanation on those teething issues?
I think I want to talk to the point that Victor was raising.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be very short about it. The challenge that I see is, firstly, a clear understanding of the value chain in the delivery of tourism. Yeah. Who are the key players that are involved in this process? And do they all understand their impact in the delivery of tourism? It is not the hotel that must discount for us to bring tourists into the country. It is everybody else, including airlines and how tour operators package and the immigration officers. So that whole value chain is very important. The second thing is, maybe we have to blame ourselves, because we tend to talk in abstract terminology when we talk about the value of tourism, to the point that a lot of people do not understand what we are talking about. The multiplier effect of tourism can be very abstract if the ordinary men and women cannot feel exactly what tourism has done for them. We will be talking to ourselves. So you have to actually demonstrate what in practical sense tourism is doing to the person who is sitting here. That way you will be able to preach to the taxi driver, to the waitress or waiter at a restaurant or hotel. These are the people where tourists will spend the bulk of their time with. If they do not leave a good impression, then we are actually killing the goose that lays the golden egg. It is that value chain that can help us. But we also, in the tourism environment, have a task to simplify our terminology and our language in such a manner that is digestible, it is easily understood. Otherwise, we are really talking academic and to ourselves.
Victor, a quick comeback before we move on.
Well, I was just saying, when you talk about the East African community in particular, the 5 countries, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi, and Rwanda, have moved significantly towards creating a common customs union. But I think they did not refine exactly how they're going to divide the, if I can use the word dividend broadly, of that seamless travel. And as a result, some companies will still be stuck, if I may say, in the nation state mentality, where they believe that by being able to tax a tourist as Tanzanian tourist, as Kenyan, as Burundian, we will then be able to make more, not realizing that tourists are out there to get a regional experience. And even if you're going to Kenya on business, you're likely to say, let me stop over in Nigeria, in Uganda, because there might be a further business meeting. So that kind of regional experience is what they should be working towards, rather than trying to be territorial about it.
Nina, I want to bring you on this particular one very quickly, just to get a sense of whether associations have been playing a meaningful role towards that regional outlook and positioning the investment case from a regional perspective and not necessarily within the confines of a nation state.
So coming from the ICA perspective again, we've identified a number of years ago, a number of our members have had discussion, and once again here at Meetings Africa, to say we actually need an African rotation pattern, to talk to Victor's point, to share the business, because, you know, ICA started where European members realized the value, both from a skills and financial benefit, to sharing the knowledge of meetings rotating. And I think if we look at that, that's creating that sharing. And, you know, normally a meeting will not only be able to go to the same country again and again. They, in order to comply with the rotation pattern, they would need to go to a different country.
What informs the rotation? Because one would think that the politics will always get their feet into that particular mix. How do the rotations work, and how do we make sure that this is devoid of politics and it's really based on the business case for advancing the sector?
So they're different things. I think sorry Victor, the association potentially would determine the rotation pattern. If it is a global association, they would normally look at the regions within the world and make sure that they are representative. And why they would do that is because they want to get more members, they want to share knowledge in different areas and expose their area of specialty. And I think if we look at an African rotation, that should be similar. So there's going to be no benefit to that association from a skills sharing knowledge if they don't go to different countries.
Well, I irritate my clients all the time, telling them they should never have meetings in Sandton. Now, let me explain what I mean. Only in Sandton.
Yeah.
By that I mean, if you just think about it, and Nina is right, look at the way FIFA is doing its business. And then people wonder why soccer is such a big sport. Okay, there are other reasons. But the mere fact that FIFA will not hold a competition in the same country unless they are absolutely forced, and I don't think it has ever happened, but they make it as part of their strategic planning that they are not going to go to the same country or the same region for that matter. It took them a while to come to Africa. So my thinking is it's up to the executives opening their minds and understanding the value that by taking this meeting, this very meetings Africa, to Nairobi next year, you will be forcing Kenya to sort out its security issues. You see, it's not the other way around. Kenya is not going to sort out the problem before they see the need. So if we knew this year already that Meetings Africa next year will be in Nairobi, then we will be talking to the authorities in Nairobi to clear the path. The same with Nigeria, the same with Ivory Coast and so on.
The challenge has been put squarely at your feet. Meetings Africa has been in business for a decade. Talk to us, one, in response to Victor. He wants to know whether you're going to Nairobi next year. But let's talk about the last 10 years. And in particular, give us the insight in terms of the most difficult hurdles that you've had, that Meetings Africa has had to surmount, and what we can expect going forward.
I'm not going to talk too much on Victor's point. I think there are different permutations to this, and Victor will know that there are other very successful conferences that have been associated with a city, for that matter, for far too long. And there's equity around that, and it makes a lot of sense, and it creates sanctity around it, and investments can go around on those bases. But I suppose what Victor should be encouraging is Nairobi and Kenya to start up their own kind of conferences in a small scale that we can all support, because it has a particular contribution. So that's partly what I would say to that point.
That's a very diplomatic answer, but I'll take it. Jeffers, let's come to you, and I want us to talk about people for a moment, because I think Nina touched on the subject. But let's talk about the skills pipeline that's necessary if we're going to see business tourism and the tourism sector broadly benefiting. Talk to us about the strategy that Kenya has employed prior to some of the issues that we saw plaguing the sector. How did the country make it work? How were you able to ensure that there was a robust skills pipeline feeding into that particular sector?
The government of Kenya invests a lot nowadays in tourism. And when I sit here, I talk about conference tourism. Kenya, we have, I can say, one convention center, that's KICC. We've always said that we need to have at least probably 2 or 3 new convention centers. And by doing so, that can attract meetings to Kenya. The government of Kenya has always spoken about improving the infrastructure. That's in terms of the roads, in terms of the airport. Actually, the JKI, if you've been there lately, you realize that it's really expanding very fast. And we have our Ministry of Tourism, which is investing so much in training and educating people, sending them out to learn from the best practices, so that they can come back home and try to imitate probably what South Africa is doing, what probably European countries are doing. And I'm sure that Meetings Africa has been a challenge to us. It's 10 years since it was started. We say that every time somebody comes to South Africa, the next destination they talk about is Nairobi. I don't want to say I know why, but that's what I hear everywhere I go. So if Nairobi is the next destination, what can we do to make it much better?
What do you think is holding Nairobi back, before I bring Nina in?
I think what's holding Nairobi back is just a matter of time to start. Once that happens, I think we'll take off very effectively.
Nina, are you going to help them get started?
I can, but I want to answer Victor's point. So I think there are 2 controversial things. First of all, I think you need to be very practical and realistic. So with ICA, we have an annual conference that we rotate around the world, but you have to bid for it. And with bidding, you have to have money. You have to have skills, you need to have capacity, and you need to have the will and a champion. And I think talking about champions, the South African National Convention Bureau has put a program together where we've got South African ambassadors and champions. And that maybe talks to the skills set and the academics. Because it's all good and well to say, oh, fantastic, we want to host something. You have to have a number of things in place. It doesn't just happen. So sorry, I think it's a little bit unrealistic to have an expectation, oh, we should just take it there. It's funding, it's infrastructure, political will, champions, and skills. There are a number of things, and I think that's very important to understand from an association approach.
I see you nodding. I just want to get your comment on the back of the elephant in the room that Nina's just plonked in front of us.
Well, I think that's the reason why I was saying Victor will understand that there are various options to this, but the infrastructure is paramount. And even from the point of view of taking a meeting there, let alone an event to any particular country, it requires all those kind of things to be in place. But we will be very happy to support meetings that are going around in Magical Kenya. South Africa has always participated there, and we're doing it deliberately because we want to make sure we are not the only country in the African continent that shines out there. Kenya may see us as competition, yes, but we are also a friendly competitor for that matter. So we'll be happy if we win the bid to Africa, and we expect them to support South Africa as well, because it's important that we continue to present proof points that Africa works and use those kind of areas that will attract business, and we all hang our heads around that and exploit the opportunity for the benefit of the rest of Africa.
I like the catchphrase that Thulani uses, and let's get you just maybe wrapping up this segment, Victor. Africa works. Do you get a sense that that message is being received as the way it's been communicated this morning?
It works, but just the two last speakers give me the impression it's not working in our minds, because, I mean, think about Kenya as an economy. Kenya Airways, Equity Bank, Safaricom, these are multinationals of note. Now you are telling me that you can't have an event, maybe not this one in particular, but a meeting of this stature is nothing for a Nairobi, because already you have the global players that are able to pull it off. So what I'm asking is, with respect, let us understand that Africa out there is not waiting for us. And that's why we end up turning on the Chinese, that they are monopolizing everything, because we sort of refuse to rotate and go and understand more. You need a fast talker like me telling you that Africa is working. If you went to Addis Ababa, you would understand it better from the ground. The same if you went to Nairobi. So it is working, no doubt. Unfortunately, as fellow Africans, often we lose out to the Chinese, to the Australians, because they are much more willing to land in the countries and do that. I'm saying these conversations should be had a lot more on the ground than here talking about.
I've got less than a minute before I go to break.
Yeah.
A very quick one, Thulani. Are Africans becoming observers of their own economic story?
Not at all. Africans have realized that everybody is focusing in Africa because of the growth. It's an economic imperative, but it is also very important for Africans to do business with Africa. It's important for us to rotate the dollar or the rand or whatever currency within Africa. It's also important that we capacitate ourselves. There's no point in one country being the only one with sufficient capacity, but also about skills. That skills base that Nina was talking about, the knowledge economy, is becoming very, very important. And for us, we really have to understand that the trend today is people start thinking continents first before they start gravitating to countries and the provinces in our countries and the cities that we're fighting about, whether the event should be in Durban or Cape Town. It does not matter. At the beginning, people have to say, is the continent of Africa ready? And which country in Africa will do a better service for this? You must understand, you're competing with a whole lot of other players out there.
Well, we're going to wrap it on that note. Is the continent of Africa ready? That's the question that the CEO of SA Tourism has put to us as we head into a short ad break. We'll see you in 2 minutes. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're still on Meetings Africa 15. We're still interrogating the narrative of Africa Rising, and we're still asking the difficult questions around the contribution of business tourism to the continent's broader growth. My guests are still with me. Jeffers, let's start back with you. Let's talk about whose responsibility is it to ensure that there is greater visibility of tourism? Is it the government from the point of funding? Is it the industry players in terms of amplifying the work that they're doing? How are we supposed to get that done? But most importantly, who's supposed to do it?
It's very easy to understand that actually it's the government which should support the industry players. If you don't have the goodwill of the government, or there's too much politics in terms of probably what you want to put on the table, then it's gonna get to the red government, the red tape, and then it's gonna take so long for even that idea to be conceptualized. You know, when I come to South Africa, I realize each and every province of South Africa has a convention bureau. How many countries in Africa have convention bureaus other than South Africa. Nairobi itself, where I come from, Kenya, doesn't have a convention bureau. And that's something we've always tried to push for. But every moment you try to get to the people who are responsible for that, you don't even have time, you don't even have access, you send emails, nobody can respond. If Africa can also, governments in Africa can invest in convention bureaus, invest in state-of-the-art convention centers, I think we can, industry players were always there to work. I don't think it can hold us.
Tulani, would you concur with that view that the government needs to put the money behind the industry players so that the wheels can turn, or would you have a different perspective?
Tourism, even if you're talking about business events, is a collaborative exercise. It takes everybody in the value chain to do their part. Government's role is maybe based on 2 or 3 things. Firstly, they have to create an environment conducive for tourism to thrive. They also have to deal with the regulatory framework, but they also, in some instances, have to put money to start up businesses. But it is not really the job of government to drive some of the business initiatives that government has got to be tasked with. So once government has dealt with the regulatory infrastructure and they have empowered you, business has to take over. And there are not many successful instances where government is very active. But I think the point that I would like to make is that governments will not support anything that they do not fully understand. Sometimes it may be budgetary constraints, but to a large extent, if we do not sell our course successfully, we cannot blame government.
So what I'm hearing is that if there isn't a very clear understanding of the needs on the ground and the targets of what's trying to be achieved, policy is going to be blunt. Give us your assessment of the policy environment.
I think that, you know, most recently the ICA African chapter had a fantastic client supply workshop in Mozambique. And we had some clients there and we spoke, and one of the questions was, do you know what a convention bureau is? And so that's to your point, and also maybe supporting Tulani here, is that not our industry doesn't know, you know, so there's a lot of education that needs to happen to actually appreciate what does a convention bureau do, what is their role, and what are they as the enabler for the private sector. And I agree, you know, we do not want our industry to be too regulated. We want the government support, buy-in from an academic or an enabler role, but we don't want it to be too regulated, and we need to be very careful of that. You know, it needs to be private sector driven with government support.
Private sector driven with government support, Victor, is this a trend that we're seeing taking off, though, on the African continent when it comes to this particular sector?
I wouldn't say that. Private sector generally feels disempowered when it comes to the role it can play. Or let me not say disempowered. It underestimates its role.
Why is that?
I don't know, because I don't know any government that has worked anywhere without pressure from its private sector. By that I mean the private sector is much more urgent because it works on quarterly profits. And when you do that, and I agree with Tulani and Nina, and that you have to then get that industry lobby insisting. Tulani says understanding. Make sure that your government understands. And that doesn't mean, well, we've told them once they don't get it, we're moving on. It means understand their needs as well, where they are, what they are battling with, and try and see if you can sell your story to them, because that's how we're going to win.
Sorry, just to jump in here, I think just to your point, Victor, is, you know, that is how the South African National Convention Bureau came about. It didn't just happen. There was from SARCI, and after the ICA Congress that was very successfully hosted in Cape Town, we had a little bit of money, and we approached the then tourism minister and said, listen, we need something here, help us. We've got a little bit of money to enable us, and with the pressure and discussion, today we have got a National Convention Bureau.
Going back to Tulani's point of it being a collaborative approach, well, ladies and gentlemen, at this particular point, we're going to invite you to take part in this particular conversation. We're going to open up this conversation into a Q&A session. What we've done thus far is that we have basically scratched the surface in terms of the key issues around the business sector and how this then contributes to the Africa Rising narrative. Now, if you'd like to ask a question, please just raise your hand. And when the microphone does does come to you, please just stand, introduce yourself, name and organization, and please ask your question. I'm also going to ask you to please not pose your question to everybody in the panel. I won't allow it. Just choose one person that you think is the best person to take on that question so that we can get as many questions as possible. And for those of you who would prefer to participate through the Twitter sphere, don't forget the hashtag is MeetingsAfrica15. Now, are there any questions? We have a question at the back and one in the front. We'll take three at a time, and we'll take the gentleman in the Navy. So, roving Mike, please, if you can start with the gentleman at the back. Thank you very much, sir. If you please stand.
My name is Mohammed Abdullahi. I work for Topcom. Topcom is from Lagos, Nigeria. My question is for the only lady in the panel. I believe you wear a very big cap for an international organization which oversees conferences, conventions. My question is very direct. What are you doing in your capacity to influence conventions and conferences to come to Africa? That was my question.
Mohammed, thank you very much. Let's take the gentleman in the front, please, in this order.
We have in the world 3 definitions about meetings industry, most of the time used in Europe. In Asia, they use MICE. Africa, Latin America, they use business tourism. The big difference between our industry and tourism is the client. So all the things we are talking about is about the client. How to do the marketing. In Europe, for example, a delegate who is participating at an international congress, for example, in Barcelona, is spending 450 euro per day, not included the ticket. The magic formula is, in the meetings industry, when you have a conference of 1,000 delegates, spending each of them 450 euro during 4 days, it's an income for the city of 1,800,000 euro. And that's our business. The same leisure tourists is spending only 100 euro. Leisure people are traveling individual. Meetings people are traveling in groups. Leisure people are going to really to relax. Meetings people are going to work, education, science, exchange of ideas, everything. Let's be very clear in the definition. Meetings Africa is all about the meetings industry and not tourism.
Marcel, thank you very much. Let's take the question at the back.
My name is Tsepo Tlaku from an organization called Junior Chamber International. And my question is to Victor. How do we deal with the bottlenecks of Anglophone and Francophone Africa? I think it's a worrying factor that we often come across, as well as the unnecessary competition between South Africa and Nigeria, which sometimes I think it cuts us from benefiting a lot more because we, for some reason, competing. And if I can also, pose to Tulani, how do we deal with engaging government on visa issues? Because often when we often have visitors coming to South Africa, but the big issue is visa, and it impedes the whole effort.
Tsepo, thank you so much. Let's take those 3 questions, and I think we could spread them throughout the panel. Nina, maybe let me start with you because some of them were tabled directly at you, and then we'll begin to take on the other issues.
So I think just the question about what is ICA doing for Africa. Most recently, over the last 2 years, we identified potentially the growth in the Middle East and Africa, and we have changed our constitution to ensure that we have got 2 dedicated seats on our board, one for Africa and one for the Middle East. And at the same time, we opened up offices in those regions. And most recently, having attended a strategic board meeting in Madrid for ICA, one of the areas is that we realize this is where the growth is. And we can't get more members and we can't help with business tourism if we're not talking to people. So we really are wanting to branch out and actually strengthen our offices both in Middle East and Africa, realizing the huge potential and growth in this area.
Let's have you take a stab at the issues that Marcel raises, in particular around what he seems to think is a confusion between tourism and the business of meetings. Let's get you responding to
I
that?
think I can only agree with Marcel, and I think his definition is excellent. And I think that's what I mentioned earlier about when people arrive, the arrivals in our countries is to differentiate. And I think at the moment, Tulani mentioned it, everything is sort of under leisure. There's no, when you sign an arrivals form, when you come into our country, it doesn't say, are you coming for a conference or a business event? It just says leisure. There's no differential that we can actually extract that information to actually prove the value chain. And I think Marcel has actually summarized that perfectly for us.
Tulani, bringing you in, a quick comment on that issue, but also the visa question that was raised.
I think just in terms of differentiating between the normal leisure tourism and the business events, I think for us we are very, very clear, and that's the reason why we took the step to set up the National Convention Bureau to focus on this, because we understood the mathematics that Marcel is relating to, that the average spend by the meetings people or business events people is much higher. They bring a spouse. They will always come back on leisure after visiting your country on holiday. And of course, they bring a partner with them who will undertake an itinerary of sort whilst you are sitting in conferences of this nature. So that one was very clear to us, and we understand the differentiation, and we are beginning to track within South Africa the arrivals numbers to differentiate between what is coming as business tourism motivated as well as leisure. On the question of the visas, I think let's start with the good news. The President announced that there will be a review panel to look at the impact of the new visa regulations, taking into consideration what could be considered as security interests of the country, but balancing it with the tourism agenda as well. We are spending a lot of money marketing in various countries, such as what you have just indicated, the speaker there has just indicated, that where we spend money, we would like to see support on the ground in terms of the facilitation of the visas, so that we don't have a so-called leaking bucket where we're putting so much money, but when it comes to the reality of people coming to this country, someone else or some other processes are undermining that kind of process. So that's a bit of good news from our side.
Quick comment to Victor, and then I'll come to you, Jeffers. Anglophone, Francophone Africa, how are we breaking down those barriers?
It's education. That's the only one word. It's up to us to educate ourselves. There's nothing that stops you from doing business in a French-speaking country purely because you don't speak French. Yes, you'll struggle. Yes, you'll need a translator here and there, but often we overplay the differences between Anglophone and Francophone. There are historical reasons, but I don't think whenever I'm in Gabon or Cameroon, I feel particularly disabled because I don't speak French. Yes, as I say, it takes a little longer to get around, but you end up learning anyway. So that's the one thing, that's education. The same thing with the Nigeria story. Nigeria needs South Africa, South Africa needs Nigeria. It all depends on which side is less informed about the other.
Yeah.
And that side that's less informed must travel to the other country. I would say Nigerians are already traveling to South Africa a lot. I would like to see more South Africans on business traveling to Nigeria. Then we will break that and we will realize we're actually two sides of the same coin. We need West Africa that works, that thrives in Nigeria. We need Southern Africa that works and thrives in South Africa.
Jeffers?
I think let me talk about the issue of visa. Maybe Tulani can listen to me also. We've had challenges between Kenya and South Africa in terms of visa issues. I think they still have that problem which has not fully been addressed. It used to take me 3 days to get a visa to South Africa, but now I'm told it takes 7 days. I was talking to a friend of mine here from Nigeria. She told me to get a visa to South Africa takes 45 days, working days. How can that be? We're all in Africa. So it used to be cost like around $50. Now it has doubled to around $100. In Kenya, we never used to pay a single penny if you come here for a 1-month visa. That's a visitor's visa. But now, the South African High Commission Nairobi outsourced the visa issues to a private company where you pay around $75. And those issues, until they are addressed, we feel sometimes that South Africa is being so hard on most of our African countries in terms of visa.
So we certainly look to that review panel and see what comes out of it. Let's take another round of questions. Sir, I saw you, so I'll note you. And were you answered?
Well, I mean, to a large extent, yes. I'm from Nigeria, and I'm also concerned about the issue of relationship between South Africa and Nigeria. like somebody just raised the point where you find on the website, you need 6 days to get a visa to South Africa, but when you actually get across the counter, you're told it's 45 days. So there are no clear-cut definitions of how these things should be. But coming specifically to the issue of the meetings industry, there's a saying where I come from that when you wake up is your morning. It doesn't matter what time of the day. If it takes South Africa to wake up earlier than everybody else, what are those clear-cut steps that South Africa is prepared to take other people along? Because you can't do it alone on this continent. You need to get others to travel.
Thank you, sir. So let's notate that. Let's take the question here in the front. This side of the room, are there any questions? And there's a gentleman there and a shy lady who's not sure if she wants to ask a question. So we'll put you on standby and see how that works out. Yes, please, sir.
My name is Victor. I'm from Botswana, writing for a publication called Sunday Standard. On the issue of the new law on immigration, just that you were saying that the president has put up a panel. Does that mean we are going to see another delay in enactment? We know it has already been delayed about 2 times. And also Victor could maybe give us his opinion on the new law. Thanks.
Victor, thank you so much. Let's take the question in the front, please. Thank you very much.
Omar Price from the BRICS Post. Tulani, could you address the issue of air capacity between BRICS members? SAA is stopping flights to China, stopping flights to India. I had to go to the BRICS summit last year in Brazil via Portugal. What's happening in terms of going to the BRICS summit in Russia? And is there any direct flight between South Africa and Russia?
Thank you very much. Let's take the lady at the back, please. Thank you very much.
Good day. I would like to find out from the panel. I've heard they've talked a lot, but I haven't heard anything about the epidemic or the risks that are involved when it comes to meetings like this. For an example, the Ebola that is happening, how much it has contributed to the economic growth of Africa as a whole. Because I believe that we felt the pinch a little bit. I would like to hear more from you.
Thank you very much. So let's take that round of questions. The visa issue rearing its head. Once again, Victor, it's been tabled to you. Let's get you commenting on that. And Tulani, maybe let's get you taking on BRICS and then we'll spread out the rest. Please.
It would be unfair to isolate the issue of visas without looking at the context in which it happens. There's global terrorism to worry about. There's a lot of migration, and when people move across borders, they bring a lot of opportunity, but they also bring risks. So the Kenya-South Africa story, if you remember, there was the White Widow story, there was this and that, and whether people are using certain countries as the gateway to perform terror acts in others. The same thing with Boko Haram now in the West African region. It affects Niger, it affects Cameroon. So in the end, sovereign countries are having to protect their borders. That's the primary consideration of any president of any country. Protect your citizens. And once you think they're at risk, whether it's from terror attacks or from Ebola, you're going to take action. But the reason is when we are all in isolation, when we do take those actions, then we go overboard. So I will say, okay, in order to protect myself, I'm going to say anybody who has ever stopped in Guinea-Conakry, will not be allowed to go into our country without considering what Guinea is doing about its Ebola situation. So again, that's where the multilateralism of Africans will come into play. That when Africans are working together, but they recognize one another as equal partners, then we won't be overreacting to anything.
Right.
At the same time, I can't say no country should respond. When there's a security or health issue, we are going to be. And then just finally, we know how we all downgraded our growth estimates, especially the West African countries with regard to Ebola. So it's not something we are, but let's agree it has been brought under control.
Nina,
I think the big challenge that we face as business tourism and tourism as general is that we need to communicate. And we, with ICA, we've seen that very often our conference this year will be held in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and they are going to be having elections. So the approach that we take is that we need to inform people. I think it's communication, talking to Victor's point, making sure that people know what are the measures that have been put in place regarding Ebola. What is the real update operate on the ground, because otherwise one does get things being spread across the media that potentially are not truths. I think in Mexico you've often had that where there's the drug wars, and so let's have what's happening really on the ground, clear communication, so that it does not prevent people from moving freely and having the opportunity to share knowledge and communicate with one another. That's really important.
I'll come to you, Tulani. I just want to take it back to Jeffers, because I think we're also dealing with an issue of perceptual contagion. And although, Kenya has dealt with terror issues, one would not be surprised to find that the Ebola outbreak actually had an impact on tourism numbers in Kenya simply because of that perceptual risk. Do you get a sense that we've got a grip on how to handle perceptual risk, even if it's not a real risk?
I think perceptual risks are not from Africans, they're from outside Africa. Because when you have somebody from US who wants to come to Kenya, and when he wants to find out if we can get Ebola in Kenya, he's told, yes, you can get, don't go there. It's a perception. We all know very well that Ebola problem was in West Africa, and not the whole of West Africa, specific countries. I'm happy that it's getting brought under control, but that perception hurts Africa very, very, very much.
Tulani, lots of issues. Let's get your pick, but in addition to that, let's talk about the issue that was raised here around the aviation part of the conversation, in particular connecting the BRICS member countries.
Let me deal with the easy one first. It's a very quick one. I just want to comment on the issue of perceptual risks that exist there and how different countries react to it. Victor is spot on. The silo mentality and how countries deal with their own issues leads to different results. Jeffers may not know this, and this is really not the platform for me. Jeffers doesn't know that South African tourism has been trying to open an office in Kenya for the past year now. The difficulties that we have is that the Kenyan government has reacted to the security risks of the past and does not allow easy facilitation of the setting up of new entities in Nigeria, in Kenya. And I'm not going to blame you for that, but I'm just saying these are some of the things that happen when we operate in silos, and the results may very much be unintended. And with that delay, I may start looking at other areas as an alternative to set up my business. And this is a very soft business, unlike others who are dealing in direct foreign investment. So these are some of the things we need to deal with. In terms of the air capacity and how it impacts on tourism, maybe a very good example, let's confine it to the South African Airways change of gauge into Beijing and India. And I'm using deliberately the word change of gauge because once they are withdrawing their own metal, they are actually replacing with a partner's metal. It gives us certain opportunities. On the face of it, it may look negative that South African Airways is pulling out. But the advantage that we'll immediately see an opportunity is the fact that we'll have more gateways into China, where South African Airways had only one point. They were flying to Beijing. The second thing is increase in footprint. South African Airways was flying to Beijing with 3 flights a week. With their partner now, they are going to be flying into several gateway points into China, and the capacity for South African tourism to market, knowing that there is a flight coming out of those markets, is much bigger. The connectivities are going to be much more seamless. Similarly, going into India, for as long as the hub and spoke exercise works well, which is a model of airlines with a very limited connecting time in any one of the gateway of the hub stations that they are choosing, then we should be seeing a benefit out of this exercise that seemingly looks like it's a negative one. It depends on whether the current capacity where the current partners are operating a particular aircraft type, whether it's a 777 or a Boeing, can change that or can increase capacity. I think there is some benefit coming out of this.
So we basically run out of time. So what I'd like us to do is to take about 20 seconds each and just to give a quick closing remark. And in your closing remark, I'd like you to address just one issue. How do we grow this particular sector? How do we contribute more meaningfully to Africa rising? Let's start off with you, Victor, and I'll end with Tulani.
The biggest enemy in any gene pool is to avoid interbreeding. I think to grow the tourism market, be it business or otherwise, on the African continent is more interbreeding, is to get more Africans traveling to different African markets. That way they will educate themselves and they will see how much potential is out there.
Jeffers?
I think the best way we can grow our tourism and also business tourism is by, as Victor says, working together in a very cohesive way. Let's not have stumbling blocks on the way. Every moment of the step you make, let's not try to make it difficult to move to the next one.
Quick one, Nina.
I think just to realize it's not only about airlift infrastructure, but it's also about the content and the outcomes and the legacy that is being created from the conferences and conventions that we host.
Tulani.
Let's understand the impact of the value chain. Let's understand the fact that tourism is a collaborative business. Let's also simplify the language of the contribution of tourism in the economies and job creation of various governments. That way, we all have a common destiny and we can simplify our work and make our lives that easier.
A common destiny, that's the point where we'll leave Meetings Africa 15. Thank you so much for making the time to join us. Indeed, difficult conversations, robust exchanges, but no doubt all single-mindedly working towards growing the business tourism sector, not only in South Africa, but the continent broadly. Thank you so much for making the time to join me. I'm Nozipho Mbanjwa from CNBC Africa.